insulin resistance is really the pathway of getting to diabetes, where actually now, you've got really elevated blood sugars, and the amount of insulin that's in your blood has to work really, really hard to drive all that blood sugar in.
Hello, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kien Vuu, aka Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. I'm going to be doing a solo podcast today. This podcast is actually brought to you by my mastermind group. I actually lead a group of men that desire performance, longevity, and we really optimize their health. I'm really fortunate to be able to work with men at the top of their game, wanting to give more to the world. And it's truly been an honor to be able to serve a group of men that are serving so many people. And if you or anyone you know might be interested in joining a group of men who are ready to elevate themselves so that they could serve other people, we focus on health, we focus on longevity and performance. Send us an email at info@kienvuumd.com. That's info@kienvuumd.com. And this week, we actually talked about a very important topic. In fact, it's a laboratory value that is very accessible. And if you know this laboratory value within you, you give yourself really a great marker as it pertains to health. What is this value? It is actually your blood sugars. Having dysregulated blood sugars is associated with a plethora of chronic diseases, including autoimmune disease, including diabetes, including cancer, including neurodegenerative disorders. Having dysregulated blood sugars is also conducive to getting the metabolic syndrome, which also leads to a bunch of chronic disease, including cardiovascular disease, the number one killer in the world today. So really important to be able to control our blood sugars. Having optimal blood sugars will give you access to optimal health, longevity, and of course, peak performance. So on this podcast, we actually dive into what are the symptoms of somebody that might have dysregulated blood sugars. We'll go over that. We'll then go over really cool hacks that you can do to actually monitor. Then we'll actually go over really cool hacks you can do to actually lower your blood sugar. So that's something that's really, really neat. And for anybody who really wants to know their biology, consider getting a continuous glucose monitor. It's a monitor you can wear on your arm. It will actually tell you what your blood sugars are in any given instant. That way you can know what stress does to your blood sugar, what exercise does to your blood sugars, what about your sleep, and what about different type of foods. Anyway, you're not going to want to miss this episode, because when you can understand how to tightly control your blood sugars, this was something I wasn't able to do a couple years back. Heck, now you definitely want to learn this episode, because when you can really hone down on how to control your blood sugars, you'll have access to optimal health. That's what I want for you. A couple years back, I didn't even have control of that. I was diabetic a couple years ago, and just know that you can take back control of your biology by very, very simple habit changes. And, if you include the hacks today, you'll have one leg up in controlling those blood sugars. So please enjoy this episode of the Thrive State Podcast on controlling blood sugar.
All right, welcome everybody to the Thrive State Podcast. On this podcast today, I am actually within my private Thrive State men community, where we actually, as a group of men, support each other on becoming the very best versions of ourselves. And so some of the questions that you'll be hearing are coming from some of our members. So I invite you again to enjoy this episode. On today's episode, we're really talking about one key biomarker. This one key biomarker is actually a biomarker that is, when it is not in control, is actually associated with numerous chronic conditions. In fact, cancer, autoimmune conditions, diabetes, basically every chronic condition tends to have this thing associated with it. However, if you get this under control, it gives you access to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. So I just want to give 5 seconds for you guys out in the podcast world to take a mental guess. What do you think this biomarker is that is plaguing a big chunk of America, as well as people adopting American lifestyles? And the guess is
Blood sugar.
There you go. John McGuire from the group had just said blood sugar, and he's absolutely correct. Having unstable blood sugar levels is actually something that is associated with insulin resistance and down the road, diabetes. So this is one of these things where if your blood sugars are off, meaning they're getting to be really high and then they're dropping really low, and you get these large swings, it's really, really bad for your health. And so that is your blood sugar. Now, one of the things I do want people to know are a couple additional labs that people could follow from that. One lab is called the hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin actually is the molecule that carries oxygen around in our body. When we have high blood sugars, the sugar could actually glob on to lots of different proteins in our body, hemoglobin being one of them. And so depending on how much blood sugar is in your blood, it will actually latch on to the hemoglobin. So if you measure the amount of glycated or the amount of hemoglobin with sugar on it, you can get a rough estimate as to what the blood sugars were doing over the last 3 months of your diet. So it's a good surrogate marker for how long, how well you've been keeping track of your blood sugars. And another lab to follow is really insulin. Insulin is actually the hormone that is increased when we sense blood sugar. Insulin is released by the pancreas, and then it latches on to our cells, allowing doors to open for glucose to enter into the cells. Now, if your pancreas is constantly pumping out insulin because you've got uncontrolled blood sugars, over time, that insulin signal is not going to work as well anymore. And so you need to pump out more insulin to drive the glucose from your blood into the cells. That is a situation called insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is really a metabolic problem that is associated with a lot of chronic diseases we talked about: autoimmune disease, cancer, inflammatory conditions, dementia, Alzheimer's disease. In fact, Alzheimer's is known as diabetes type 3. So insulin resistance is really the pathway of getting to diabetes, where actually now, you've got really elevated blood sugars, and the amount of insulin that's in your blood has to work really, really hard to drive all that blood sugar in. So this is a major problem, and getting our blood sugars under control is actually critical to achieve optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, and also avoid getting chronic disease. Now, let's now talk a little bit about the symptoms of uncontrolled blood sugar. So how do you know, other than maybe getting your labs done, how do you know if you've got uncontrolled blood sugars? Well, here are some symptoms that you guys could monitor that might suggest that might be the case. One, you've got sugar cravings. And you've got sugar cravings like right now. Like you are craving the cookie, you are craving the brownie, you've got all these. Every time you're walking through something, you're thinking sugar. So that could be a sign that your blood sugars are out of control. A next sign is that you are hungry even after you've eaten. You've just had your meal, you had your lunch, but like an hour later, 90 minutes later, you're still hungry. That might be a sign that your blood sugars are out of control. Another sign is getting fatigued or tired, particularly after meals. It's possible that when your body's relying on sugars and your blood sugars are not well controlled, fatigue and tiredness, particularly after meals, could be another symptom. Now, those are the typical symptoms, but there are additional symptoms like panic attacks. Some people with uncontrolled blood sugars will just start to feel an emotional rush, like their heart starts beating real fast. They'll start getting palpitations, or they get very nervous. That could be an unusual symptom. So those are some symptoms from that. Now, those are some short-term symptoms if your blood sugars aren't under control. And what could happen in the long term? Well, in the long term, insulin resistance and uncontrolled blood sugars could lead to hormonal imbalances. And so you can get acne. In women, you can get something called polycystic ovarian syndrome. Women will tend to have will start, getting masculine features, and men will start to get more feminine features. All those things happening from the hormonal changes that occur with prolonged blood sugar not being in control. Now, what are some of the things that are actually happening that's leading to, what's the pathophysiology of elevated blood sugars and getting chronic disease? Well, one of the things is, I mentioned a little bit earlier when we talked about hemoglobin A1C, is a concept called advanced glycation end products, also called AGEs. So as I said before, sugar can glom onto proteins. And when they glom onto proteins, it makes those proteins sticky, it makes those proteins ineffective. And these advanced glycation end products are actually very damaging to cells. They don't work as proteins, and they could be inflammatory as well. They tend to actually bind, to receptors. These AGEs bind to receptors called RAGEs, which are the receptors of the advanced glycation end products. And in Alzheimer's, there's actually receptors in the brain where these advanced glycation end products bind. And that's actually one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease as well. Another thing that people should be aware of is when the blood sugars increase in the blood, what does it do to the mitochondria? The mitochondria is actually the battery pack of all the cells. And so mitochondrial dysfunction is actually noted to lead to cellular dysfunction. And therefore, when your cells start to not function very well, your tissues don't function very well, that will put you prone to getting chronic disease down the road. What happens with elevated blood sugars? Well, elevated blood sugars actually start to inhibit your mitochondria. And then it also increases oxidative stress in your body. So that's really, really bad because, again, the mitochondria are the battery packs of your cells. And imagine your cells just being shortchanged of batteries, and you're releasing all these toxic substances, reactive oxygen species into the blood that are, really poisonous to the body. So, those are some reasons why elevated blood sugars can actually do to your physiology, and why it's associated with so many chronic conditions, chronic symptoms, and chronic disease as well. So I'm going to pause really quick and look to the members who are on my call right now. Any questions thus far before we talk about the hacks that we can do to help control and alleviate our blood sugars? Very good. All right. So, hopefully we talked about the importance of maintaining healthy blood sugars and why it's important for optimal health, and how not controlling it can lead to disease. Now, I'm no stranger to this because 6 years ago, I was a diabetic. I had elevated blood sugars. I had an elevated hemoglobin A1C. And I was feeling tired all the time. So I know this. And, a lot of my clients end up, showing signs of insulin resistance or diabetes. And one of the things I can tell you now is if you can adopt certain hacks, you could actually help reverse those conditions and be at a state where your blood sugars are in tighter control. So those people who are listening who might be diabetic or who might have insulin resistance, that condition is reversible. So work with a healthcare provider to help reverse those things. But let's just go and talk about some of the things that you can do to monitor your blood sugars. The first thing is the type of foods that you eat. So what's going to raise your blood sugar? Well, sugar. Sugar is one of those things that is going to raise your blood sugar. And the more simple the sugars are, such as fructose, such as pure sugars, it's going to raise your sugar or raise your blood sugars even faster. And in addition to sugar, what are the other things that will spike your blood sugar are starches. Simple starches. We're talking about bread. We're talking about rice. Those starches will break down into sugars and will raise your blood sugar. If you want to actually control what you eat, be very mindful of the sugar content in your foods. There's actually hidden sugars. A lot of things that end with ose, sucrose, galactose, all these O's are actually, secret names to hide the fact that there might be sugar in your food. So if you please watch out for processed foods because they'll tend to hide sugars in a lot of them. So avoid sugars, avoid processed foods, and certainly avoid simple starches. That's number one, is the type of foods that you eat. Okay. This episode of the Thrive State podcast is brought to you by the Thrive State Accelerator. The Thrive State Accelerator is actually a home course that I developed using the exact same techniques I work with my celebrity clients, CEOs, and executives on how to get them to the Thrive State. The Thrive State Accelerator teaches you how to master your 7 bioenergetic elements. That's sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, relationships, our thoughts and mindset, as well as purpose. In this Thrive State Accelerator, you're also going to get a bonus module on optimization. That's how I talk about supplementation, peptides, all the optimization techniques I use with my clients to get them to the Thrive State. Now, for some of you who are just joining us for the first time, you guys might be wondering, what is the Thrive State? Well, the Thrive State is actually the energy, the epigenetic environment we give to ourselves, telling our DNA how to act and how to respond. And if we want optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, if we can master these 7 bioenergetic elements, our ability to have those 3 things that we just said, optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, is at its greatest. And it also prevents you from getting chronic symptoms like brain fog, being overweight, feeling sluggish, acne, pain, all these chronic symptoms, as well as preventing you from getting chronic disease. So getting to that Thrive State is really getting to that state to master being that very best version of yourself so you could show up for you, for your family, for your business, everything that's important to you. So go ahead, check it out right now at kienvuu.com/accelerator and use coupon code podcast25 for 25% off. Now back to the podcast. The next thing is a practice that is really a part of life. And this practice is something that our ancestors use constantly, and really how every single life form has evolved. And that practice is fasting. Now, every single life form has evolved to be able to deal with times where they don't have energy sources. And fasting is one of those things that all living organisms has adopted to do. Unfortunately, because of refrigeration, because of our ability to have snacks now, people are eating all the time. And if people are eating all the time, guess what? Your pancreas is working all the time, pumping insulin out, making people prone to getting insulin resistance. So every time you fast, you allow your body some time to rest the pancreas and to start learning how to use different forms of energy. You know, when you're eating starches, when you're eating sugars, your body is using that as a form of energy. However, when you're fasting, you're actually using your body's fat stores to be converted to energy. This is what's called metabolic flexibility. And having metabolic flexibility is very important for optimal health. So one of the things that you can do to improve insulin resistance is to fast. There's different ways of doing it. There's certainly different intermittent fasting schedules, which I'll be posting some videos on. And there are some prolonged fasts. And there's a product that I actually recommend to my audience out there, which is the fasting mimicking diet from Prolon. Is actually a way to actually reap all the benefits from fasting without actually fasting itself. Please look for the link on this podcast, as well as using the coupon code ThriveState to receive 15% off. So fasting is a hack that's really, really important to be able to control your blood sugars. Now, here's some really, really neat hacks coming up. So we've got number 1, which is the foods you eat. Number 2, fasting. Number 3, guess what is the order in which you eat your food can actually control whether or not you get a blood sugar spike. The order in which you eat your food. You can eat the exact same meal, eat the exact same things. However, if you switch the order around, you can avoid having a huge glucose spike. So what is the actual order? Well, first thing is you want to include some sort of fiber or the vegetables first. Eat that first because it will create fiber and it will actually create, basically this fiber wall that kind of coats your stomach. And that's going to slow down the absorption of all the nutrients that are coming in. So number 1, eating your vegetables or your fiber first. The next thing is to eat your proteins. So eat your proteins next. And then lastly, eat your carbs. So if you're having a little bit of carb, like a little bit of a baked potato, along with it, some steak and vegetables, eat the vegetables first, then the steak, and then you can enjoy your rice at the end. So that is super, super important. And one of the biggest mistakes you can do once you know that order is important is that when you go out to a restaurant, guess what they bring out first? What's the first thing they bring out? They'll bring your drinks out. And what's the first thing they will serve with your drinks?
Bread.
There you go. Everybody just said it. Bread. That's the worst thing to do when you're eating, is eating your carb first. Restaurants may or may not know this, but what will happen is when you eat bread, it's going to spike up your blood sugar, and you're also going to get a huge insulin surge. And guess what? With that huge insulin surge, all that blood sugar is going to be mopped up and goes right into your cells. And guess what? Your blood sugar is going to drop. And what will happen is with that huge glucose spike, insulin's going to rush in, and then your glucose levels are going to drop. And what will happen at that point is it's going to make you hungrier, and it's also going to make you crave more carbs. So that's one thing to definitely avoid doing, is avoid eating bread first. This is why you should probably not have a starchy breakfast and eat things last. If you are going to enjoy, some form of starch, have it at the end of your meal. So the hack number 3 is the order of food matters. And that's something that you guys should be aware of. Hack number 4 is a spoonful of vinegar makes the carbs go down slower. A spoonful of vinegar. So if you take 1 or 2 tablespoons of vinegar, it could be any kind. I personally like apple cider vinegar, and you have that before your meal. Mix it up with some water and you chug it down. It does 2 things that actually helps regulate your blood sugars. Number 1, it inhibits something called alpha amylase, which actually alpha amylase is the thing that actually breaks down the starch. So if you are inhibiting that and slowing that process down, you're actually basically breaking down that process from starch to glucose, and you're slowing that process down, which inhibits the spike in the blood sugars. And the next thing is the apple cider vinegar also seems to increase the absorption of glucose when it enters your bloodstream into your muscle to form glycogen. So it acts to basically cause increased muscle uptake of that. And if you try apple cider vinegar, there's been some studies and some research demonstrating that you could actually lower your glucose spike by up to 30% if you're enjoying a meal with this. That's hack number 4, is include a little bit of vinegar. Hack number 5 is no naked carbs. Don't have any naked carbs. What does that mean? Well, if you're enjoying some rice, for example, and enjoying some bread, if you just had it alone, what's going to happen is that alpha amylase is going to break down that starch into sugar really quick and give you a big glucose blast. However, if you dress that starch with either some fiber, with some fats, or with some protein, it's going to decrease that glucose spike with your foods. So, if you're having a piece of bread, if you throw in some grass-fed butter on it, that's going to decrease the spike. If you're eating a baked potato, for example, including, some butter or some, full fat sour cream will help actually lower that glucose spike. So don't eat any carbs naked. Dress them with some protein, fat, or some fiber. That's hack number 5. Hack number 6 for, controlling your blood sugars is using your muscles after you eat. So after any meal, if you go out and you walk, you take the stairs, or you go out for a walk, during that time period, you're really activating those muscles to take the glucose out of your bloodstream and into the muscles itself. So doing 10 to 15 minutes of a very light exercise, and walking is perfectly fine. You're going to decrease that glucose spike, and so that you have better blood sugar control. And the last hack, which is really important for blood sugar control, is sleep. Getting quality sleep. We're talking, probably 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep if possible. If you're tired during the day, you're probably not sleeping very well. But what does sleep do? Well, if you're not sleeping very well, what's going to happen is you're going to increase a hormone called ghrelin in your body. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone, and it increases your appetite. And not only does it increases your appetite for food, but particularly for sugar. So that's not good. And then it decreases a hormone called PYY. And what is PYY? PYY is actually an appetite suppressant. And so when you're suppressing a suppressant, you're going to increase your appetite. Another thing is if you are not sleeping very well, is your cortisol levels tend to also be high. Cortisol actually causes blood sugars to increase in your body as well. So if you're not sleeping very well, or if you're under a lot of stress, this is where meditation and stress reduction techniques are really important, because when cortisol levels are high, your blood sugars also tend to follow. So there you have it, 7 important hacks to control your blood sugars. And let's review them. Number 1 is the type of foods that you eat. Again, simple starches and sugars are the things that are going to boost it up the most. And one surprising thing that I was using recently that I didn't realize would cause such a huge spike in my blood sugar is oat milk. Oat milk is basically just a huge glucose spike. Oat milk and dried fruit are things that will spike your blood sugars up really, really high. So I tend to avoid those. So watch those. All right. Hack number 2 is make sure you incorporate some fasting. Hack number 3 is the order of foods in which you eat. Remember, fiber or vegetable first, then comes the protein, then the carbs. Hack number 4 is including a spoonful of sugar in a cup of water prior to your meal. Hack number 5 is don't eat any carbs naked. Hack number 6 is use your muscles after the meal. And hack number 7 is to make sure you sleep, and also to include some stress reduction techniques. Now, I want everyone to know that everybody reacts to food a little bit differently. What controls your blood sugar is dependent on your hydration, your muscle mass, your insulin sensitivity, your menstrual cycle, if you have a menstrual cycle, your stress levels, as well as your microbiome. These are all bio-individual to each particular person. So some of these hacks might work better for some people than others. How do you actually know if it works or not? Well, there is a device called a continuous glucose monitor. It's actually a patch that you could actually wear on your skin that actually tracks your blood sugar levels. And I find it's a great device to use in a short period of time. You could try it out for 2 to 4 weeks. But what it'll do is it'll give you some biofeedback. It will tell you, man, what happens when you exercise to your blood sugars? What happens when you're not getting enough sleep with your blood sugars? What do these foods do to your blood sugars? And that's where you can test your own bio-individuality, is by using a continuous glucose monitor. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. One of the most important biomarkers to control in your life, if you want to have a long life and be free of chronic disease, is your blood sugars. These are the hacks that are available to you. And it's definitely things that I use. I've reversed my diabetes myself, and I've really utilized these new habits, and just recognize that your habits too can lead you to a long and healthier life. And with that, I'm going to turn to the group for a second to see if there's any questions people have on blood sugar control.
Got a question?
All right. We've got John McGuire. John McGuire, welcome to the podcast. What's your question?
Well, I'm going to get my blood drawn tomorrow, and you've given me a list of, things that you want me to have them, measuring. And I'm wondering, it's not until the afternoon, until my appointment, and I've been used to fasting now for long gaps. Is it okay to wait and get my blood drawn at 2 or 2 o'clock, 2:30 tomorrow, and just fast the entire, since tonight?
That's a great question. I would always recommend for people when you're getting your labs done to do it at right around the same time every day, because those biomarkers are going to change throughout the day. For example, cortisol is going to be high during the day. It's supposed to drop a little bit later. So you want to be getting your labs around the same time every day. Now, the time also matters. So I recommend for people to actually get their labs drawn as early in the morning as possible and do it in the morning, because there's less variability to the results that we actually get. That way you actually, if you do actually need to take fasting labs, that's something that you're already doing with sleep. So you take advantage of your sleep time. And also if you're getting your hormones checked, for example, that actually changes with exercise and physical activity. So I also recommend for people not to have sex or strenuous physical activity the night before they're getting their labs, and don't do it the morning of. You can go ahead and do that after your lab.
So it might be better to do it like another day. He orders it, and then I do first thing, say Friday morning after fasting.
Yeah, I would recommend that. Thank you very much, John. We believe we have Freddie. Freddie, go ahead with your question.
When you were mentioning the vinegar, the brand that kept popping in my head was the Bragg's apple cider. Does it matter?
It doesn't matter the brand so much, but I love that brand. I use it myself. And so Bragg's apple cider vinegar is my go-to for that.
Teaspoon, tablespoon?
Yeah.
In the morning?
Before your meal. So after each meal, you could do it before lunch, you could do it before dinner, and you basically want, 1 tablespoon or so.
Thank you.
Right before you're eating, like 5 minutes before or half hour before, or what?
Yeah, not long, 5 to 10 minutes before. Just enjoy that. Some people call it a vinegar mocktail. So enjoy that before your meal. And again, each hack and its effect on each person is going to be a little bit different. And if you want to monitor what it does for yourself, then consider doing a continuous glucose monitor.
My Bragg's has a little bit of honey in it, I think, and I mix it with water. Is that, the Bragg's liquid amino or Bragg's apple cider vinegar?
I would recommend the one without the honey, only because the honey will stimulate the insulin response.
Good to know.
Any other questions from the mastermind group here? Doesn't look like we have it. Well, there you have it. Thank you for enjoying this episode of the Thrive State podcast with us. This is a very simple trick that you can do to optimize a biomarker that's so important. So I just want to remind you again that you guys are your best medicines. We'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if this podcast is bringing a lot of value to you, if you find that your life is just improving with this podcast, that your life is getting to the next level, please consider supporting it. And here's a few ways you can do so. You can do so by liking this video and commenting on this video, and also sharing this video with your friends and family. Another thing you can do is go to ratethispodcast.com/ThriveState. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review there. It will really, really help this show grow. And this will give me more time so that I could actually give more content to you, just like you got in this episode. And if you haven't already picked up a copy of my book, Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance, you can pick it up now. It became a #1 new release in longevity. Go to thrivestatebook.com. And if you enjoy the book, please consider leaving us a review as well. And the last thing you can do, if you're liking everything here and you want to work more closely with me as well as my team to get you into the Thrive State, go to kienvuu.com/accelerator and consider joining the home course, the Thrive State Accelerator. It's really the course that I use. It's the concepts that I use personally when I work with CEOs, celebrities, and my high-profile clients to get them to the Thrive State. Again, the Thrive State Accelerator at kienvuu.com/accelerator. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want you to save 25% by using the coupon code podcast25. I hope we continue to give value to you. And remember always, you are your best medicine.